Let me put away my Starfleet Academy notes and the VA notes. So yeah, Mac, I was just telling them about the Starfleet Academy game, which will probably start in July around the same time we get back into the VA. So as far as spoilers go, because everyone here, for more or less, is a GM, I don't really consider it spoilery. To tell you that eventually the VA is going to have an issue where it goes back in time, and that's going to basically restart or start a new timeline, a new universe. Now, one thing I would like you guys to be thinking about is your character, when you guys get to 2380, because that's when the new timeline kind of starts. Think about where you want your character. So, for example, Merc is an ensign, or maybe he'll be a lieutenant at the time. Who knows? But we're going to be starting the official, and we are starting with Starfleet Academy. We are starting the timeline at 2400. So, 20 years down the road, where do you see Merc, Ensign Merc? Is he a lieutenant commander now? Is he a captain now? Is he, And that's eventually, once we start a new timeline that's not Starfleet Academy, you'll basically be remaking that character in that, as a captain or whatever he happened, or they happen to be. And then if you want, you can make a whole new character, or you can do the Starfleet Academy game, make a cadet, you can do whatever. But then at that point, we'll have a timeline that when new players show up, we can be like, bam, here's the timeline. If you're not going to be in the Academy game, or even if you are, really, and we don't have to worry about trying to, well, actually, back in 2388, blah, 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 this war happened. Oh, wait, no, it actually ended in 28. None of that, because I did, like I said before, I did try for a while to make a timeline, but it just never got kept up with. So, yeah, anyway, we'll go ahead and start our thingy today. And like I said before, this will be one of our last, not sure if it will be the last, but one of the last talky course lesson thingies. Either, I think next time, which is going to be actually on a Tuesday on the 29th. So the Tuesday before the VA picks up again, we'll be doing a one-shot, and I will have a volunteer basically co-GMing with me, and I will still have a bunch of stuff to talk about, a bunch of pointers and everything like that, but it'll be more in line with how, basically why and how Star Trek Adventures is different than a lot of other RPGs, because that's probably the main, I'm not going to say complaint, it's the main comment, I think, about Star Trek Adventures and a lot of Modiphius games, if I'm thinking correctly, especially like Fallout and other Modiphius games, is like they're not your traditional RPG of run in, combat, kill stuff, take their stuff and loot, get XP and leave. That's probably why I actually play Star Trek and not many others, because when I created my own Star Trek post-apocalyptic role-playing game, I made it very heavily role-play. You got, obviously it's post-apocalyptic, so you had to gather resources and stuff, but it was very much less about the chance of the dice roll, and more about, are you smart enough to survive the apocalypse? But anyway, so yeah, before I mentioned, however much you care is directly proportionate for how much you prep for a game and plan for a game. And then, of course, the game improves because you plan more and prepare more. And then, of course, that makes you care more. Then the players care more, and it's basically this cycle. We all, or a lot of people, I should say, have different ways of gauging, things like that. not everybody. I mean, Mr. Mambo is probably famous for disagreeing or appearing to disagree with a lot of things that I say, but he would probably be one of the first people to tell you that even though we're different, very different in ways that we GM, we can still have fun in the games. Now, I'm not necessarily going to have fun in a game that's like super crunchy or anything like that. I mean, I can definitely put my best foot forward and see what happens, but a lot of times, when you're in a game as a player, from a player point of view, um, no matter how much the GM, how good the GM is, it's just not your kind of game, and you might just have to be like, I'm done, I'm gone, bye. That actually happened to me with the Phoenix. It just wasn't my story wise and everything. It was fine. It was just there were certain things about it that I just could not reconcile in my mind, and instead of trying to argue about it, because we had argued about it before, I just left. And as a GM, it's the same way except in reverse. So like, not every player, being as not every player is going to like every GM style. You have to understand that that you're not going to like every player style, and that if a player leaves or if a player complains or anything like that, just take it and say okay and move on basically. I think that was probably the hardest lesson for me to learn, was like, just because a player doesn't like your game doesn't mean it's bad. And even today, like, I think I didn't even I think it's been relatively recently, like weeks, since I've actually come to terms with that and actually been like, okay, well, maybe it's not bad, it's just different and not their style or whatever. Um, if if you're a GM and see, this is the a hard topic to talk about, is kicking players out of games, because, like I said before, every GM has their threshold of like what they're willing to tolerate. I mean, I'm notorious for not kicking people, but for many reasons, even the reasons that people say I should. But and then there's people that, like, if you disagree, they just kick you immediately. But basically, you got to figure out your own threshold, and there's obviously some that would say, or there's some reasons that a GM might kick someone that might not be valid, like just disagreeing or something like that. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you keep everybody, no matter how toxic or argumentative they are, or whatever, and then eventually it's just going to, or cheating. That's probably my biggest pet peeve, is our role players that cheat, because like, how are you why, like, you can't win against the game. It's a role playing game. If you got the best of everything in one module, or one game, one session, or one adventure, one campaign, okay, great. And then what about the next one? Like, you can't win at every single thing. And that being said, the one of the hardest things for me was, I I used to try to force players to be like, okay, be passionate about this like me, like I am. And that's the thing where it's like, you're not going to be able to do that. It's if they don't want to be there, then eventually they're going to leave anyway. So if you try to convince them, hey, do this, hey, do that. Now there's some things that you need to do. You need to get on them about, like, hey, fix your reputation and your milestones, because that's part of the game. But as far as like if I had captain's logs, like, let's say I made captain's logs mandatory or something, and back when we actually had player character captains, they weren't mandatory, but they were like super strongly. I basically super strongly recommended, hey, you should do captain's logs, and people would be like, okay, and they'd like half-heartedly do it, and I'd be like, okay, great, that's fine. But that doesn't go anywhere. That doesn't that's not, going to help in the long run. So on the opposite end of the spectrum is like the GM that's like not passionate or not enthusiastic about the game, which is like a very monotone, kind of boring. Like, okay, this is what you're gonna do. I've actually, my first Star Trek Adventures game, which oh my god, it's actually on YouTube. Like, um, I wasn't the GM. I was the player. The first two that I was ever in was on another server. You guys can guess which server it is. The server I always complain about. But and like there's a whole subreddit dedicated to how bad that server is. That's how bad they are. But basically, like they were just the guys. The GMs were just monotone, very like, okay, so you attack the ship. Okay, roll your dice. Okay, like not passionate, not enthusiastic, not and like in certain during certain like things that they would be super like passionate about, but it was always like when they screwed over the players was when they were passionate. Like that's one thing that I hate. GM versus players, not that should never be a thing. Like in my games, I think most of y'all can attest to this. Like in my games, whenever y'all do something great, like sign a treaty or make first contact or whatever, like I'm like, yes, great, that's awesome, and I make a big deal out of that. But I don't ever try to kill anybody. I've never, like, even a lot of times in the few times that we've had combat, I can't think of a single time that I've actually wished that a player character died. So I can't say that I've fudged the dice so that they didn't die because I don't remember. But I probably would have, or that's probably something that I would have done. But the good thing about the way combat is done in Star Trek Adventures, and even our homebrew kind of house ruled way, which we'll get to eventually, but is you don't really have to fudge the dice a whole lot. So I don't think I've ever actually fudged dice. But anyway, so whenever and this is just me, but whenever I get too into something, like I got too into this server, this game, I basically eventually just have like a burnout, as you guys know. And Durlock and Mac were here for when the last burnout happened, and I was like, I'm just going to go for a bit and I'll be back maybe next week or something. It'll be fine. I was gone for 8 months. I didn't even open the app. I didn't even open Discord for 8 months. And then when I came back, a couple people were gone, obviously, for, I can't blame them. But, a lot of them were still here. So props for that. And I don't even know if it was 8 months. It might have been longer. It might have been shorter. But it was a long time. So one thing that I have noticed about GMs, especially in Star Trek Adventures, is because they have this like GM versus player mentality of like, I'm gonna kill you with all these Orion pirates or this Klingon attack or whatever. They keep like putting threat down or basically they just keep bringing in reinforcements. They just keep trying to do that, which I never understood. Because I was always the kind of the GM that's like, okay, here's a ship that you have to fight. Oh, you want to try diplomacy? Awesome. That's probably going to work a lot better. But they just kept on going. And one of the GMs actually said something to the effect of, one of the players asked, like, what are you trying to do, kill us? And the GM was like, well, I'm the GM, that's my job. And I was just like staring at the screen for like so long. I was just like, how can that be an actual GM that takes this seriously? Because I just can't imagine that mindset. So one thing that I also noticed just watching YouTube videos and things is like, a lot of players have this trust issue with GMs because, like I said, they try to kill them. And in that first game that I was in, or maybe it was the second one, I don't remember, but one of those two games, like, nobody wanted to do anything risky at all because they were worried that the GM was just going to drop threat on it and be like, okay, well, now you have 3 Klingons to fight instead of just 1. And so everyone, we still had that guy who jumped over railings and tried to karate kick Klingons. But for the most part, And we had people that were just like, I don't know what to do, because if I go over there, there's Klingons. If I go over there, there's Orion. Like, what do I do? But so that's one thing that, and that's not just in Star Trek. That's as far as I can tell, because I've been in some Adventure Leagues games. Well, I've been in one Adventure Leagues game where there was like 15 players, and it was just combat for 4 hours straight. And all the GM did was try to kill us. And so one of the things that I wrote down here is you have to earn their trust, because until you earn their trust, they're gonna think that whatever is, like, I mean, even in the beginning when I GM'd, I made my players paranoid all the time. I had a shapeshifter at one point. I had Romulans cloaking everywhere. I had nanites that would just kill them in their brain instantly. Like, and that was probably not a great idea. Now, from a story perspective, whatever, it could be good, it could be bad, but just from the idea of, like, we were all new to this, and I was basically like, okay, you could die at any second. Like, probably not the best idea. So if your players assume or know that, they trust you enough to know that, like, okay, we're on the bridge of a ship and we're exploring space. Space is dangerous, but it's also space. It's highly unlikely that you're going to just run into a Borg cube because of how huge space is, unless the Borg cube is actively looking for you. So, like, that's one thing that I try to incorporate into my games, is the sheer largeness of space. Is like, so nowadays whenever people scan, they rarely detect anything unless there's something actively tracking them or they're actively looking for something. But it's just one of those ways that I try to, like, get players to trust me. Now, the players that have been here a while, they pretty much hopefully trust me by now to know that I'm not just going to kill them for no reason. But new players, they might not be that way. They might not, they might just assume, oh, he's like that other GM that, just wants us dead or whatever. But yeah, no, that's one thing that we as GMs have to do, and not even just GMs, honestly, like just anyone in any position of leadership or power, like, they're either gonna be afraid of you or they're gonna, trust you, and those are, like, you got to figure out which one that's going to be. So let me see. There's some players, and again, this goes back to, like, your threshold of what you're willing to tolerate. But some players are not very respectful as far as the effort that a GM has to go through to actually do the GMing. I just don't think they know. They've never tried it, and they've never, experienced GMing, so they assume that all you're doing is you wrote a few notes and you're looking at a notebook the whole time. And then when they go off and do something that that you didn't plan for, and then you're basically improvising for half the session, they're just like, oh well, he's got it, it's fine. We still have players like that on the server, but my view on that is, like, I keep them in the corner of my eye, and I watch them, everything they do, everything, like, even in general chat, like, I read everything, because it's a certain kind of personality, if that makes any sense. Whereas, however they treat a GM in a game is kind of how they feel, like, how they are in life in general. And so I don't trust them to stay around, or I don't trust them in many instances. I just don't even trust them to run a game, or to even play a captain or a first officer in a game. Like, I keep them on, like, basically they're on my list of people to keep an eye out for, because if they basically treat the game like it's just, that's fine, the GM will take care of it. That's like the opposite end of not trusting a GM. It's like completely trusting the GM to take care of everything. Because, like, yeah, GM, you can say, okay, the GM is basically a Q, he can snap his fingers or whatever, but, like, do that too many times and your players will stop caring, because they'll be like, well, he can just snap his fingers and make anything happen, so it's, the consequences of our actions don't really mean anything. And I've especially lately, maybe in the beginning, but I've tried I've tried very hard to not do that, which is why I kind of have a captain NPC or captain NPC is because, you know, the best he can do is order the crew to do something that me as the GM knows that they should do. That's the best he can do. He can't snap his fingers and make the ship turn into a giant squawking chicken. He can't throw the crew into a wormhole, like, with omnipotent powers. Like, he literally can only give them orders, and they could still choose to not follow them. So I have had cues and omnipotent beings in the games in the past, but I quickly realized that, and this even goes to say, about talking about the Infamous and his OP ships and weapons and technology. But I quickly realized that, if your players feel like what they're doing isn't making a difference, or that someone else can just snap their fingers and make things happen better than they can, then even if they do try, they're still going to kind of feel like, okay, well, maybe there's no point in my character even being here. That's kind of a side tangent, but it still has a little bit to do with players and how they can be, and how GMs can possibly deal with that. I think all of you know, but maybe some of you don't. But I have instituted a player reputation system that only I know, and anyone with storyteller rights. If you basically, if you know where to look, you can find where their reputation is. In fact, for some reason I cannot find it. I think maybe Discord has screwed me again. But that being said, it's basically just between the GM and the player. It's like, hey, you need to work on this, or hey, can you not do this anymore? And it's basically like, and that way okay, this is how much I can trust them, what they can do. I can have this person be a captain, I can have this person be a security chief, leave this one as a cadet because he tried to vaporize somebody for no reason, stuff like that. Like, but yeah, that's another side tangent. You have to earn their trust. Because, like I said before, you have the ability to kill everyone in the universe with a single word or thought or snap of the fingers. First combat encounters. So I've actually seen a couple videos about this. I half agree with most of what they say, but because I don't do combat that often, especially in this game, this kind of almost doesn't really this doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. But there are a couple things to keep in mind with combat encounters, especially the first ones, because that's when you can either make or break the trust with characters, because that's like, combat is where a lot of people are super, it's very black and white in many cases. Not everyone, but like a lot of people either really love combat, especially in Star Trek Adventures, or they really hate combat, especially in Star Trek Adventures. But also, combat is where people who love combat and like only do combat, that's where you can start seeing the red flags come up. And the people that don't love combat, you can kind of say, okay, well, how can we help them with this? How can we, because obviously if you're playing a doctor, you're not going to do a whole lot of punching, and you're going to be doing a lot of healing. So you can basically see, okay, how do we make it so that this person is actually involved? But one of the main things regarding trust in combat is to punish reckless behavior. Consequences is important. So I think most of you were on the Excelsior for the one shot when a dude decided, I'm going to kill 200 clones who are in these chambers by sabotaging the machinery, even though everyone agreed that they should let them out and basically let Starfleet Command deal with them and figure out what they're going to do with all these clones. And I let him do it because, I'm not going to just be like, no, you can't. First of all, if it was not a one shot, I probably would have. I probably would have had some kind of Deus Ex Machina, maybe bring the first officer, the Captain Adams back or something, and had him, don't let him do it or something, because it would have had a huge effect on more things than just that. But it was a one shot, so I was just like, whatever, let him do it. Now, I still punished him for his reckless behavior, though. His character was court-martialed, and he complained. Obviously, I mean, he didn't complain at the time, but the point is that player characters, when they do stuff like that, because he's not the first person that has done something like that, but when they do something like that, 9 times out of 10, it's not a character, oh, this is what my character would do. It's a player issue. We have had a certain player consistently kill innocent people on accident because he was trying, he's basically being reckless, and he's trying to attack the bad guys, but he ends up killing innocent people. Some of you know who I'm talking about, but and every time he does that, his reputation goes down, this, that, and the other. But eventually, it's going to come to a point where he's going to do it, and it's going to be too much, and his character is going to be either court-martialed, killed, injured badly, whatever. And that's the thing that in the first combat in a Star Trek game, I feel like if you do something even slightly reckless, consequences need to be shown that, like, hey, this is a living world that you're dealing with. You can't just do stuff and then expect it to work out, if it's reckless and horrible. The other thing I would say is reward diplomacy and wise behavior over the shoot first, ask questions later. So my main thing that I say, and everyone has heard it multiple times as far as I know, is I will always provide a diplomatic way out of combat until I don't. But if I don't, I will let you know. I think there's only been 1 or 2 times that I've ever told the players, hey, diplomacy is not an option here. They're going to open fire. And even then, I think it's like with the Breen episode, I was like, diplomacy is an option, but if you fail this, you're going to be in combat with the Breen. I let them know because, that's part of building the trust. Everyone comes, or most people here come from a D&D background where, if you talk to the orc warlord, and you fail your persuasion check, he's going to cut your head off or something like that. So it's hard to come into this universe and be like, okay, well, if I talk to the Breen and I fail, well, maybe, just maybe, I have another option later. That's not something that I'll just say me. That's not something that I imagine people consider when dealing with diplomacy. And in fact, there's been a couple times where someone has failed a diplomacy check in a Star Trek game, and they've almost immediately, red alert, shields up, open fire, they almost immediately do that. And I'm just like, calm down a little bit. It always also, that's why I always say, roll insight, because, dealing with a Breen and dealing with a Klingon are 2 different beasts, I mean, yeah, they may be both warlike, but they have different goals, they have different motivations, temperaments, different codes of conduct. So just, a lot of times you just roll, well, does my character know about the Breen or the Klingon culture? Let me roll insight to check. But that gets more into the nitty-gritty of the game. Basically, just, if... even if it's a completely warlike culture that, the Jem'Hadar or, a robot, the Borg even. The Borg is probably the least likely for diplomacy to work is probably the Borg. I mean, if you roll in that 1, I mean, maybe it works, maybe it works. It's worth a try. So I always reward, even if they're just attempting it, even if they attempt it and they fail, it's like, okay, you failed, but maybe I give them extra time to prepare for the battle. But, I never just say, no, you failed, now you're all going to die. Number 3, you'll never put them in a situation impossible to get out of without warning. I added without warning because I do have a plan to put people in, I actually have 2 plans to put players in impossible to get out situations, but I feel like I should warn them that it's coming first. For example, the Mirror Universe a bit, where some of you guys went to the Mirror Universe to rescue somebody. I don't even remember who it was. That whole episode was a blur to me, to be honest. But I was, when you went onto the Alinda colony and you were fighting, and Mac's character cut off the android's head and started beating the Revenant to death. I warned you guys, you're going to be in a situation where this is a pretty bad situation, and when you try to beam off the planet, it might not work out too well for Keith Rand. And you knew that, and you were like, well, she either stays here and gets hunted forever, or she dies, and that was the choice that was made. So sometimes you don't have a good answer, a good situation, but I make sure you guys know it before getting into it, at least usually. Um, uh-oh. I think my battery's dying. Let me check it real quick.
Yes, do you remember that one moment Finn takes off an android's head and uses it?
Sorry, my battery, my thing died for some reason. What were you saying, Mac?
And yes, you remember that one moment that Finn did one thing.
Was that Finn? Yeah, that was Finn, wasn't it?
A hologram, the original one.
Yeah. Um. Sorry, I don't. I hope it. I hope my mic cut off exactly when I heard the beep. Because if I was just talking for 5 minutes and no one was hearing me, that would suck. Um, but yeah, warn. Don't put them in a possible situation. So I'll tell you what the two situations are. Y'all are storytellers anyway. One is I really want to do a post-apocalyptic game where you guys literally, without all of your technology, get landed on a planet and you guys need to find resources and survive. And I will randomize all of that so that it's not like I don't even know how you will survive. Like I want to do that, but I also want to do an episode where you guys are just where players are just stuck in a room with like no way to really escape. Kind of like that episode, I forgot what it was called, where Picard was stuck in a room with like 3 other people, and one of them was a traitor, and he had to, and it was ended up being that Bolian cadet or something like that. I want to do something like that where you guys literally can't get out, but if you do, like you guys have to like figure something out, or be super diplomatic or something. I don't know, but like there's literally, mechanically speaking, like you can't hack the door or anything, but yeah, mechanically no way out. Those are the two that I want to do, but I have no plans to add them into the story as of right now. It might be next timeline. It might never happen. I don't know. But those are the ideas that I had. Anyway, so the other thing is forgive player mistakes and appreciate good RP. Ah, yes. And I don't know why I put these two together. Maybe because I was listening to one of my RPG horror stories, and one of the GMs didn't do this that I was playing with. But in the Phoenix game, I as a player made a lot of mistakes, and I told the GM, I was like, I feel like my character would know the difference between this and that. And the GM was like, nope, nope, nope. This is definitely how it's gone. You just caused a civil war. And I'm like, great, awesome. And I think this is kind of well known, and even Mambo has told me this, but I'm way more forgiving as far as like player mistakes. How many times have you guys heard me say, "Are you sure you want to do that?" Like I basically like give you all the opportunities in the world to make sure you don't do stupid things that you as a player might do, but your character probably would never do. And appreciate good RP. I don't know why that's it, to be honest, but I feel like it's probably because like sometimes players will choose the role play. Oh, that's why. So I was actually in a game where I was the first officer, aka science officer. I was playing Keith Rand, set in Kirk, the original series era, and I was basically in charge because the captain was off doing something. I don't know. But then I was basically like, okay, well, these Klingons are attacking, or the Herosian, because, yeah, they put Herosian in the original series. But anyway, I was like, okay, so these people are attacking, and I can either try to hail the starbase that they're attacking and figure out, like, what they need, and if they have anyone boarding them and attacking, like, physically there, so I know, like, what level we're at, or I can just do some mechanically combat-y thing, maybe direct or rally or assist or whatever, something that you would do in like a D&D game, basically choosing combat over roleplay. And I remember making the decision at the time, right before that, I was like, you know what, I'm not going to be pulled into you have to help your party fight these monsters, even though your character would never do that, and your character is smarter than that and is going to actually do the diplomatic thing or the smart thing. So I said to the GM, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna hail them, find out if they have anyone boarding them, because I wanted to know if we needed to send anyone over to help them, because it was a civilian station, they with very few people. It's not like it was a 1,000-person starbase where they could easily defend themselves. So I was like worried about that, and they're hunters, they're Herosian, they're hunters. So like that's the thing that they're known for, is physically going over and hunting them. Klingons too, to an extent. So I was like, I got to make sure. And of course, everyone's like, oh, huffing and humming and hawing. Oh my god! And the GM's like, are you sure? Blah blah. You shouldn't do that. And I'm like, yeah, I know everyone wants me to do a combat related thing, but I feel like we need to know this information. And he was like, yeah, no. He calls back and says there's nobody. Okay, moving on. So like I basically quote unquote wasted a turn to find out that there was nobody over there. So like as a GM, the way I would do that was I would actually be like, okay, well, even though you quote unquote wasted a turn, I'm going to give you like something. Like, okay, maybe there's nobody over there because that would seriously jeopardize things, but maybe I'll give you another bit of information that you would need so that it would make the job easier. I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but like I would do something like that because that's a good idea. I mean, I thought it was a good idea anyway. But like, for someone to choose role play and for it to be good role play, I would choose, or I would try to show my appreciation for that. The first, and the reason why you want to do that on the first combat situation, the reason why you want to do all this on the first combat, like the first few combats, is because you want your players to know basically how you do combat, and if they can trust you. If you give them a Borg cube on the very first combat and they're flying a Danube class runabout, they're probably never going to trust you again. And basically that's the whole point of your session 1 or your session 0. Any lessons that you want to show them, or like house rules. Maybe it's the rule of cool where you're like, yeah, just do a backflip and karate kick the Klingon in the face. That's fine. Anything like that should be done in the first combat, in my opinion. Basically, just to be like, okay, here's my cards out on the table. Obviously, as they level up or get promoted or get a bigger ship or whatever, the threats get harder. Usually, for me, it's based on the story. So like, Season 2 was just the infamous and doing diplomacy, and then Season 3 was like the Swarm and the Zaravi and all that, and then Season 4 is now the Kelvin. So Season 5 is going to probably be a lot more powerful enemies. But y'all know that I'm not going to just have them show up and vaporize the Earth. Like I will give you I have given you so many opportunities with the Kelvins. I mean, I introduced the Kelvins in 2018, and it's 2021 right now. So I've given you so many opportunities to do things to prepare for the events that's about to happen. And so like y'all know that. So but that's how I do my combat. Is like I have it have something to do with the story, not necessarily trying to kill the players. So that's all I have for right now. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask, or comments or complaints. Anybody?
I love you.
I love you too, Kat. All right. I'll probably be on here for 15 minutes, but after that, I'm probably gonna go and go look at the guns my brother brought. He brought 4 more guns and a rifle, so I'm gonna go look at those. But yeah, if anyone has anything, let me know before I go.